Hello and welcome back to Let the Stone Speak. I'm Brent Nagtegaal, the host of the program here in Jerusalem, Israel. For today's program, I want to play for you an interview I just did on Mount Scopus here in Jerusalem, the campus of Hebrew University, where I interviewed Professor Yosef Garfinkel. He's famous for his excavations in Khirbet Qeiyafa, Khirbet these places where, until very recently, in the past 2 decades, weren't excavated. And what he's discovered there is pottery, city walls, urbanization from the time period of King David. Naturally, of course, there's going to be a lot of discussion about such a provocative or seemingly provocative topic as King David. But here in this paper, Professor Garfinkel puts together 4 cities and then a 5th from just after David's time that shows that there was a simultaneous urbanization of Judah, even all the way to the periphery outside Jerusalem. So I'm really excited to play for you this interview. Of course, I'll leave in the show notes links to the paper itself that was recently published by him. I did also want to just give a plug for our magazine. This goes by the same name as the program, Let the Stone Speak. Comes out 6 times per year. It discusses similar content that you're going to see on the podcast today. It's available absolutely free if you go to our website, armstronginstitute.org. So thank you very much for watching today's program, and thanks very much to Professor Garfinkel for taking his time to talk about this important subject with us. Professor Garfinkel, welcome to Let the Stone Speak.
It's my pleasure.
So I'd like to talk about your latest academic paper that you've written. It was published in the Jerusalem Journal of Archaeology, and it's entitled Early City Planning in the Kingdom of Judah, Khirbet Qeiyafa, Beth Shemesh 4, en-Nasbeh, Khirbet ed-Dawwara, you can correct me in a second, and Lachish V. So it's a very academic sounding paper title, but it has serious implications for the reigns of the kings David, Solomon, and Rehoboam. In it, you discuss how in the past decade, or perhaps even longer, there's been a scholarly push to say that the expansion of Judah from the highlands only took place in the 9th century or even into the 8th century. However, you believe that the data, and you present this in your paper, that the data presents a different picture. Perhaps you can explain how you went about this.
It's a big question how you make theories and how do you prove theories in archaeology. Now, many scholars like to build theories like, David never existed or there was no kingdom in the time of David. But what these are based on? Nothing. What I'm trying to do is to, first of all, to go to the field and collect data at important archaeological sites, which will eliminate what really happened in the 10th century BC. And so far I excavated 3 sites, which are relating to the 10th century BC. 2 sites are Khirbet Qeiyafa and Khirbet El-Rai. Now, Khirbet Qeiyafa was a big fortified city, and we discovered the inscriptions and public building and the metal object and imported object, and it was really a very large and important city. Khirbet El-Rai, on the other side, was a small village. We have only 4 or 5 rooms from the time of King David. But together we have a city and a village from the time of David. Now, what I try to do is, what are the implications of Khirbet Qeiyafa? And what happens that Khirbet Qeiyafa was built in a very specific urban planning. The urban planning. We have a casemate city wall. This is a city wall which has 2 parallel walls. Okay. Outer wall, inner wall, and in between you have rooms. Right. And there are walls that separating one room from the other. So this is in a way a hollow city wall. It's not as strong as a city wall which was built from a solid wall. But on the other hand, it's cheaper and you can build it faster. So there are advantages and disadvantages to this type of casemate city walls. But the fact that this is what we have in Khirbet Qeiyafa. Now what's happened that after doing more and more research, I discovered that even in Beth Shemesh, a similar city was found in level 4. This is Beth Shemesh 4 in the article.
This was really interesting reading through your article. After you talked about Qeiyafa was kind of the game changer in many ways because, as you write, this was the first time that you could kind of delineate the pottery that would belong to the early 10th century based on your carbon dates and a few things like that. And then in your paper, I think the big standout thing for me in your paper was your coverage of Beth Shemesh. It seemed like this was opening up a new city to the 10th century that I hadn't really known about too much.
So Beth Shemesh is a very important site, and it was excavated by a number of expeditions. There was an early excavator already in the Turkish period, and then somebody excavated it during the British time, and in the last 30 years there was another expedition, Israeli archaeologists. And what happens is that in the second expedition, in the late 1920s and early 1930s, a chasmed city wall was found. And the excavator reported and said, we have a chasmed city wall like in Tel Bet Mirsim and like in Tel en-Nasbeh, two other sites which has the same pattern. And if you look at the early articles like Avigad and other scholars, they wrote about it in the 1950s, and even Yigal Shiloh in the 1970s, wrote about the chasmed city wall of Beth Shemesh. And then came the last expedition, Tel Aviv University, and there it's, you know, the hub of minimalist approaches, and they completely ignored the earliest results, and they said that level 4 was a village, and they even said it was a Canaanite village. But you know, the pottery and the radiocarbon dating of this level, level 4, is exactly like Khirbet Qeiyafa. But they didn't have but they ignored the city wall. But now when you add the city wall to the pottery and to the radiocarbon dating, what do you get? Another city like Khirbet Qeiyafa.
And the geography of where these cities are located is important as well, Beth Shemesh and Qeiyafa in particular, correct?
So both of them are sitting on the western border of the Kingdom of Judah, and when you have a main route leading from west to east.
Like a valley.
Yes, you have the valley of Elah, where Khirbet Qeiyafa is located, and you have the valley of Sorek, where Beth Shemesh is located. So both sites are on the border, where you have a main route, and both of them has the same urban planning. Now we have two more sites which are in the northern part of Judah. You have the site of Tel en-Nasbeh. Some people identifying it with biblical Mitzpah, where Prophet Samuel stayed. And in this site, Tel en-Nasbeh, we have the same urban planning, a chasmed city wall. And where is the site? It's in Benjamin, in the northern border of the Kingdom of Judah, on the main road leaving from the hill country, from Shechem and Samaria into Jerusalem.
Down to Jerusalem.
So it's the same pattern again, the same urban planning and the same location on the border, and you have the same urban planning. So this is the third site. And the fourth site is Khirbet Dawwara, which was excavated more than 30 years ago. And again, the site was published as 11, 12, 10th centuries BC, like time of the judges and maybe the first kings of Judah. Nothing specific. But now when you look at the site, it's only one layer site. And the urban planning, it's a small site. But again, you have chasmed city wall, and the pottery is like in Khirbet Qeiyafa. So the excavator didn't understand what he was excavating.
Right.
But now again, you can see another fortified city on the border when you have routes leading into the Kingdom of Judah.
So it sounds like your paper is kind of putting together two things. It's putting together dating of certain structures, the dating of a layer, and then it's also putting together the urban planning that's associated with that specific dating. Do you think it's fair to look at these excavators from 30 years ago and talk about, well, why didn't they come out a bit stronger, that this was a 10th century Judean or Israelite or Davidic style city? Or do you feel like they didn't have the dating from the pottery is probably as specific as you're looking at it right now?
I think that the main lack with Khirbet Qeiyafa, that it was built and destroyed after 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm. And when did you excavate?
We excavated from 2007 to 2013.
So this is relatively recently in terms of excavation history here.
Yes. But Khirbet Qeiyafa was like a biblical Pompeii from the time of David. It was built and destroyed within 20 or 30 years. So everything inside it is from the time of David. And this was the first time that we have a kind of fingerprint, how the material culture in the time of David looked like, how the pottery looked like, how the metal object looked like, what was the cult, what was the animal bonds, what was the economy, what was the international connection. This was not known before. Because if you have a site that existed for 300 or 400 years, it's very hard to find 25 or 30 years.
Right.
So it was a kind of luck. In antiquity, it was a big catastrophe that Khirbet Qeiyafa has been destroyed so shortly after it was built. But from archaeological point of view, It creates a biblical Pompeii from the time of David.
Right. It creates that snapshot from 3,000 years ago. So if we talk about Khirbet Qeiyafa and then these other sites, do you feel like, you've basically gone to look at previously excavated sites and try and match up the pottery that you've found from David's time at Qeiyafa and Arai, and then saying, well, this must be 10th century as well in these other locations. What about the urban planning? You mentioned that there's a casemate city wall, 2 walls parallel, and perhaps rooms attached to it as well. Is this something that's Judean, Israelite, Philistine? Is it exists?
Okay, we don't have it at all in any site that belong to the Philistines or to Canaanite sites.
Okay.
It's only existed in this period in Israel, in sites which belong to the kingdom of Judah and later to the kingdom of Israel. But there is one big difference between the Judean cities and the Israelite cities. Mm-hmm. In Judah you have the Casmat city wall and you have the private houses abutting the city wall, and the Casmat is part of the house. So it means that the city wall is public, the houses are private, and you combine public and private together, which is not an ideal situation, as we all know. Mm-hmm. When you go to site in the kingdom of Israel, you have Casmat city walls, but then you have a street, and the house is starting after the street.
Interesting.
So houses and the city wall is standing for itself.
Does the casemate wall style architecture or urban planning, does that go back before Iron 2A or before 1000 BC, or is that just coming into vogue at that point?
Here in Israel, we have it only from around 1000 BC. Okay. In the 4 sites that are mentioned in the article. But we have it in Jordan a bit earlier.
Okay.
And this is in itself quite interesting because there is a tradition the David family originated from Moab. Mm-hmm. So maybe there was some influence, from the area of Moab, that it was not invented in Judah but was adopted because they have good connections with the Moabite people.
Interesting. So if we could, look at the bigger picture now about what you're espousing, this idea that Judah didn't expand from Jerusalem in the 9th century. It happened in the 10th century. What's the historical or the traditional attachment to that time? We've mentioned David as well. Do you see this as being evidence of a Davidic expansion at that time?
Before David, in the time of the judges, we have small villages, mm-hmm. which were about 1,000, 2,000 square meters, or 1 dunam, 2 dunam, okay. Or 0.1, 0.2 hectare. But now, look at the new cities, they are 20, 25 hectares. So they are 20, 25 bigger than the earlier site of the time of the judges. So it's really a revolution. People don't live in small tribal communities or extended families. They now live in a city. And in one city, you can have 4, 5, or 10 extended families. Mm-hmm. So it's a total different way how the social organization is now organized.
Like are these cities, in your opinion, that are created by a central authority or tribal authority, or?
No, but the fact that all of them has the same urban concept, and they are sitting on the borders of the kingdom, and they are sitting when you have a main route leading into Jerusalem, means that it was a planned operation. Mm-hmm. You don't build a city here, a city here, a city here, and suddenly you have the border of the kingdom. So I think before they put the first stone, there was a concept about how these things should be organized.
You also discuss a 5th city in your paper. You discuss Lachish, which you're returning to excavate again on Sunday for 3 weeks. How does Lachish fit into this? Because this is probably dated slightly after the others that you're discussing.
Okay, so what happens after we have a better idea about the early part of the 10th century BC, I decided to start looking for the later part of the 10th century BC. And there is a biblical tradition about King Rehoboam, mm-hmm. that he fortified 15 cities in Judah. And one of these cities is Lachish. So I decided to go to Lachish and see mm-hmm. if we can find a city wall or what happened in Lachish in the later part of the 10th century BC. Now Lachish was a big Canaanite city, which has been destroyed at the time of the judges. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then the place was not inhabited for about 200 years, or some people thought even 300 years. Right. So during the 12th or second part of the 12th century, the 11th century, and first time of the 10th century, the place was not inhabited. the last Canaanite city was level 6. And after 200 years or so, they built a new level, which is level 5.
Okay.
Now, the big debate about level 5 was, is it fortified city or a village, and what is the dating?
And so before you started excavating there, they had found level 5 already,
Yes.
but they didn't believe it was fortified, is that correct?
There was debate about it, yeah. Or the first excavator said it was built by King David and Solomon, destroyed by Shishak, and then level 4 has been built by Rehoboam.
Okay.
This was one of the ideas of the first expedition. But then if you look at all the different opinions, they varied from the early 10th century BC to the middle of the 8th century BC. 250 years between the highest and lower dating for level 5 at Lachish.
So this is the way that archaeology can be 30 years ago, but perhaps before the advent of carbon dating, before you get those absolute dates that can help out, right?
But I'm not making new speculation. I said, okay, let's go and see what's happened. Now, we were the 4th expedition to Lachish. There were 3 earlier expeditions, but they worked in the south and eastern part and the center of the site. Almost nobody examined the northeast side of Tel Lachish. But I thought that this is the most important part of the city. Why? It's near the river. And the river is important because it gave you water. There are fertilized land in the valley. And this is also the main route leading from Ashkelon, the port city, to Hebron in the hill country. And Lachish is halfway between Hebron and Ashkelon. So you can see that caravans leaving the port city of Ashkelon, going 1 day walk, staying in Lachish, doing economic transactions, and then walking another day walk and will be in Hebron. So Lachish, so I think that this point, that close to the river, will be the most important part of the city. And I said maybe in the beginning, in the Iron Age, they built a smaller city, because the whole tale of Lachish is about 7.5 hectares, which is rather big. So I think it's logical that when they built the first Iron Age city, in the time of the kings of Judah, the first city was maybe 3 hectares or 4 hectares, not immediately all over the site. And indeed, we excavated in the northeast corner and we found a new city wall which was not known before. And then we have houses abutting the city wall. And then we sent olive pits for hydrocarbon dating, and we get dating in the later part of the 10th century and the first part of the 9th century BC. Okay. So you can see that Lachish was not built by David and Solomon. It was built and used by Rehoboam. And this fit the biblical tradition that Rehoboam fortified 15 cities in Judah, including Lachish.
Sorry, go ahead.
Now, if you look at the earlier 4 cities with a chasmat city wall, they are located up to 1 day walk from Jerusalem. You have Jerusalem, Khirbet Qeiyafa is a day walk, Beth Shemesh is a day walk, en-Nasbeh is half day walk, and Khirbet ed-Dawwara is half day walk. So more or less a 1 day walk from the center. But Lachish is much further away. So from Jerusalem to Lachish, it's 2 days walk. So you can see that the area has been expanded. But it's interesting to see that site further to the south in Be'er Sheva Valley, like Arad and Be'er Sheva, in these times they were unfortified villages. Right. But later, in the middle part of the 9th century, they became fortified sites. So I see that we can see here that the kingdom of Judah expanded over time. It didn't happen suddenly.
So that's definitely 100% your scientific opinion. It's not influenced by the Bible, because you do have a city further to the south, Hebron, that the Bible very clearly says was where David ruled from originally. But you, according to your opinion in this model that you're designing, would you expect to find 10th century construction, urban planning, if you could ever excavate there?
What I'm trying to build is a scenario built on the archaeological data.
Right.
It's independent. This is the city wall, this is the geographical border of the kingdom, and this is the main route leading into the kingdom. These are facts. And you can see that they all belong to the same wave of urbanism. And according to radiocarbon dating that we have from Khirbet Qeiyafa and Beth Shemesh, they are from the earlier part of the 10th century BC. And the other side, which we don't have radiocarbon dating because they were excavated much earlier, they have the same pottery or the same urban planning.
So do you think...
And then Lachish is different. Right. When we're excavating level 5 at Lachish, the pottery is not like Qeiyafa.
Right.
It's already different. And not only the local pottery, also Cypriot, also pottery from Cyprus. In Khirbet Qeiyafa, we have an earlier type of Cypriot vessel, which is called black on white, something like this. And then later in Lachish, level 5, we have black on red. So the Cypriot pottery in Qeiyafa is earlier, according to Cypriot archaeology, and in Lachish later. And the same happened with the local pottery. Because what we have in Khirbet Qeiyafa is a beginning of a new tradition, where you have red slip and irregular hand burnished. In Khirbet Qeiyafa, it's very rare, but it's already there. Right. When you go to Lachish 5, it's very common. Right. So you can see development over time in the local pottery and the exported pottery from Cyprus.
Are you considering any other tells or mounds? Because you've obviously gone back to see what they found at Beth Shemesh and these other sites after their excavations. You didn't excavate them. You looked through their their discoveries, their pottery. Are there any other, would you expect to find any other cities with this 10th century pottery on the periphery of Judah? Are there others that could be investigated?
I heard that now the excavation at ed-Dawwara, which is between Qeiyafa and Lachish, also has an early 10th century BC pottery. But I didn't see yet if it's fortified or not fortified, what is exactly the context. So I didn't see a meaningful report yet about these discoveries. But I'm sure that there will be more sites. Right. I don't believe that there is, I don't believe in exceptional discoveries. Right. Because people behave in a pattern. Right. And archaeology, what is the role of the archaeologist is to find the pattern. Right. Now when you find the first city, you don't have a pattern yet because it's just one. Right. But then after 10 or 20 or 30 years, you can have the second example. And after another 10 or 20 years, you might have the third and the fourth and the fifth. And I think that today we have enough examples that pointing to a pattern. And this is what's so important, I think, in this article. So far, I published all the results about Khirbet Qeiyafa. But it was only one site. From one site, you don't have a kingdom. Right. And now, because it was possible to see the pattern also in 4 other sites, you really get a nice picture now.
And I think I think it's just amazing because people know that archaeology has gone on for a long time. There's a lot of digging that's happened for the past 150 years here in the land of Israel. And yet here we are in 2023 and we're still having these dramatic, I would call it a dramatic discovery pattern, as you've said, that would do something as important as push back statehood in Judah a good 100 years. I think that's amazing that these type of discoveries are still happening. Do you feel like there's going to be lots of pushback, or you don't care about that anymore?
No, I never cared about it. I mean, I'm always saying we have fresh data, right, and they have a collapse theory. Right. That's what happened. But also you need to, I think that sometimes people don't, maybe some people don't really understand our archaeology working. Do you think it's possible for me to go to Washington, D.C., excavate and find Abraham Lincoln? Right. It's not possible. Right. So in a way, it's not possible to find David. Right. But what do we see? We see the transition from tribal community into a state. Right. And we can see that it's happened at around 1000 BC, the time of David. But we cannot have David himself. It's not possible in archaeology to find one person. Right. And the same, by the way, with Solomon. You cannot find Solomon as a Solomon. But we have traditions that in the time of Solomon there was intensive royal activities, building activities in Jerusalem, like a palace and a temple. And in Khirbet Qeiyafa we have a building model, an elaborate model, which has the same architectural features that appear in the Bible in relating to the building activities of Solomon. Right. So you can say that this type of royal activity, royal building was known in Jerusalem in the time of David. By the way, today, this shrine model was sent to Russia, believe it or not, with all this war with Ukraine and the revolutions that just happened a few days ago. This shrine model, one of the most important discoveries ever made in Israel, is now in Russia, in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. It was sent for 3 months, and then it will come back to Israel.
That's hope so.
And you know, it's just a small one, it's 30 centimeters, but they put it in a very elaborate wall, and there is an aerial photograph of Khirbet Qeiyafa, which is something like 4 by 5 meters. Very, very impressive exhibition in the Hermitage.
Well, I think that just speaks to how much, and I think honestly a lot of Israeli archaeologists, if I can make a generalized statement, probably are surprised at how discoveries that are made here can affect people across the whole world, such as your excavations at Qeiyafa as well. So I think we've had you back to Oklahoma. You've spoken before our students there, bringing some of your discoveries or discussing some of your discoveries, but there's a wonderful appetite, I believe, around the world for these type of discoveries that you're making.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. All the best with your excavations out at Lachish. If we weren't excavating, I definitely would come out there and see what you're up to with your team. Perhaps we'll be able to make it out there and see, but I'm sure we'll hear about your discoveries.
You're always welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for watching the program today. Thank you, Professor Garfinkel, for taking the interview with us. If you like what you saw today and you want to see more of it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and then also if you can hit the bell notification as well. Otherwise, you just won't be notified when we have new content. Again, if you enjoyed what you saw today. One other thing I'd like to mention, at this time we are conducting excavations with Professor Uzi Lievner of Hebrew University on the Ophel, this area just south of the southern wall of the Temple Mount, a really important area. And I'd like to introduce you to our blog. This is a blog that where we post 2 or 3 times a week an update of the excavation, how it's going on. Depending on when you're watching this video, the dig ends August 2nd or 3rd, 2023. So if you're watching it before then definitely go to our website, armstronginstitute.org, and you can scroll down to find where you can go to the blog itself, or you can just click on the link in the show notes of today's program. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.